All right, so once again, welcome everybody to our panel titled Navigating Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Engineering Education, a Pedagogical Response to ABET's Program Criteria. I am Dr. Brianna Benedict McIntyre, and I'll be your host for today. So if you need anything on the background, any links that are mentioned, please just let me know and I will make sure you receive them. So first, I want to give you a little backstory as to why we're even hosting this panel. And when I say we, I am referring to the ASEE Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Professional Development Committee, as in partnership with the Institutional Change Team. So a few months ago, Dr. Margaret Pinnell, she's our leader for the institutional change team. In our executive committee meeting, she mentioned how it would be helpful to facilitate a conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion and ABET. And so this recommendation sparked a collaboration between the Professional Development Committee and the institutional change team. And so in this panel, we hope that you gain insights on how other educators and leaders have integrated diversity, equity, and inclusion into their curriculum, as well as some of the challenges that they've experienced. And once I'm done talking, I'm also going to drop a citation link in the chat for I guess I would say, fairly recent article that I read a few months ago. It's titled Approaches to Address New ABET Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Criteria in Biomedical Engineering Curricula. I think it gives a great overview, I guess, behind the story of the importance of it and the ways that you can think about integrating DEI into your curriculum, ranging from the content and assessment as well. So now we're going to launch a quick poll because we want to understand who's in the room with us today. We designed this experience, I guess thinking about faculty would be primarily the individuals that would be here, but it'll also be great just to check. All right, I'll give it about 30 more seconds where most of y'all have completed it. All right. I think we planned correctly. Most of our attendees are higher education professors, but we also have some administrators, consultants, and library services and nonprofit folks in the room as well. And we have 2 students. So thank you all for coming, and I'm glad you all decided to join us today. So in today's panel, there will be 2 opportunities for Q&A. We wanted to acknowledge how some people may need to leave at 3 p.m. That's what we've realized over the past few months when we've been conducting workshops and panels. So feel free to speak up whenever that time comes. So for today, we have 2 moderators, Peter DeCrescenzo. He's the Assistant Director of USM's Louis Stokes Alliances for Minority Participation Program. And so that I guess his work actually represents the entire state of Maryland, not just at UMBC, but I believe that's his host institution. And Dr. Margaret Pinnell, she's a professor in the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering at the University of Dayton. So I appreciate them for moderating this conversation today. And so for our panelists, unfortunately, we're not going to have Dr. Eddie Rojas today. There was a time commitment or time conflict, and so he's not able to join us. But we're excited about the people that we do have in the room. So we have Dr. Jenna P. Carpenter. She's the founding dean and professor of the School of Engineering at Campbell University. She is also immediate past president of the ASEE. She was the incoming president-elect of the Mathematical Association of America and a past president of WEPAN, the Women in Engineering Proactive Network. Prior to Campbell, Dr. Carpenter was Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies, Director of the Office for Women in Science and Engineering, and Juanita Spinks Endowed Professor in the College of Engineering and Science at Louisiana Tech University, where she served on the faculty for 26 years. Dr. Carpenter is a national expert in innovative STEM education, as well as issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM, particularly those impacting the success of women in STEM. She is also the recipient of the 2023 ABET Claire Feldbinger Award for Diversity and Inclusion. Next up, we have Dr. Joel Alejandro Alex Mejia. He is an associate professor with a joint appointment in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and Chemical Engineering and the Department of Bicultural Bilingual Studies at the University of Texas at San Antonio. His research has contributed to the integration of critical theoretical frameworks in engineering education research to investigate deficit ideologies and their impact on minoritized communities, particularly Mexican Americans and the Latinos X's in the Southwest United States. Through his work, he analyzes and describes the assets, tensions, contradictions, and cultural collisions many Latino students experience in engineering through testimonials. He is particularly interested in approaches that contribute to a more expansive and understanding of engineering and sociocultural context, the impact of critical consciousness in engineering practice, and the development and implementation of culturally responsive pedagogies in engineering education. Third, we have Dr. Olga Pierkos. She's a STEM education program director at the National Science Foundation and a founding professor of Wake Forest Engineering. She is the founding chair of Wake Forest's engineering program, which was recently ranked as the 14th best undergraduate engineering program in the 2023 U.S. News Report, which is from a group of nearly 275 peer institutions. Olga is an engineering education researcher, biomedical and mechanical engineer, and a national leader in transforming undergraduate engineering education and higher education. She has served as founding faculty of 2 brand new engineering programs and served on several national roles, including as program director at the National Science Foundation from 2015 to 2017. She has led Wake Forest with a focus on inclusive excellence, curricular and pedagogical innovation, and creative partnerships across the university within the region, state, and nationally. Olga is also the principal investigator of a multi-year Kern Family Foundation Keen Award to integrate leadership, character, and entrepreneurial mindset across the Wake Forest engineering curriculum in a project that launched in 2019. And last but certainly not least, let me move these pictures. We have Chloe Agg. Chloe Agg has worked in medical device design and as a building services engineer, designing heating and ventilation for factories, laboratories, and schools. While working in the construction industry, Chloe also led a graduate training scheme and gave guest lectures, inspiring her move into academia. Now she teaches design, inclusion, and professional skills in a mechanical engineering context. Working in academia gives her the opportunity to get involved with a broad range of design projects, as well as activities focused on making engineering more diverse and inclusive. This ranges from animatronic birds to hand cycles through tampon testing machines, and has resulted in her leading the UK's first EDI in engineering module. In her role as student experience champion in the mechanical engineering department at Imperial College London, she aims to address racial awarding gap in the department and to increase numbers of women in engineering. So once again, as you all can see, we have an excellent panel with a breadth of knowledge as it relates to integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into the curriculum. So I am going to hand it over to our moderators.
Hi, I'm Margie Pinnell, and we were going to just kick off this session by defining DE&I as defined by ASCE, and I'll provide a link after I'm done providing this definition. I'll put it in the chat, and I'm reading this verbatim. So ASCE believes that diversity and inclusiveness is essential to enriching educational experiences and innovations that drive the development of creative solutions in addressing the world's challenges. ASCE is committed to increasing the participation, inclusion, and empowerment of historically underrepresented segments of society in all venues where engineering is taught, practiced, and supported. ASCE envisions a culture of engineering that values different perspectives, represents, celebrates, and serves the whole society. We must actively promote diversity in engineering, particularly supporting those who have been continuously disadvantaged, and also ensure that all individuals are provided with equal opportunity to access, pursue, and advance in engineering careers. With equity and inclusion, our society will systemically evolve. Engineering solutions will consider all societal contexts and truly serve all society's well-being. And as I said, I'll put a link to that here in just a minute. So with that, we're going to get started with the panel questions, and I'm going to turn it over to Peter for the first question.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. My name is Peter DiCrescenzo, he, him, his pronouns. So we're going to pose a few questions. And as we've noted earlier, after about 3 questions, we're going to open up for Q&A. We'll revisit another question, and then we'll open it back up for Q&A. As we go through this first question, it may make sense for Chloe to go last because of her global perspective, where it may look a little bit different. So the first question is, please provide an overview of the current status of ABET's diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice focused criteria, and discuss its potential implications for your institution. Who would like to take that first?
I can go first, I guess.
Wonderful.
So if you look at the criteria, there's really sort of 3 things out there. One is in the curriculum. It talks about making sure that content ensures awareness of DEI for professional practice consistent with mission. Criterion 6 with faculty. Have to describe how faculty demonstrate knowledge of applicable policies and demonstrate awareness appropriate to equitable, inclusive environments for students, respective of the mission. And then institutional support criterion 8, making sure you create and foster a respectful environment so that student outcomes can be attained. So for us at Campbell University, of course, we're a fairly new program, about 9 years old. We do a very hands-on project-based approach all 4 years. So our students are in teams and doing projects the whole time. So for us, that's a really good way to embody and demonstrate and begin to educate students about DEI from the very beginning. You know, you don't want to do something that tells them, okay, learn this so that in X years you have to use that. It needs to be something we're going to use today. And so looking at the way that ABET's asking you to do these, doing these through as part of the team training, the sense of belonging, these are things we start on day 1, very first semester talking about. So that's sort of the approach that we've used. We do some training, we do it at multiple points. And talk in very practical terms about DEI and in particular how it applies to teams, because again, that's a way they can begin to use that immediately. We also, of course, have a strong focus on professional development training, which means a strong focus on professional organizations. And certainly we have a number of diversity-focused organizations. And so that gives us another chance to sort of highlight that and engage students.
Thank you.
Go next, is that okay?
That'd be great.
Okay, great. I'm glad that Jenna read actually the criteria for it, but I was hoping somebody else would do that. Thanks, Jenna. So I think intentionality is really important, and I agree with what Jenna shared. You know, there's so much that has been invested, certainly by NSF, where I am right now, in regards to thinking about student-centered pedagogies. And I think that's a fundamental way that all of us can really think strategically and think intentionally around what we do. I think oftentimes we see one course here and there that truly uses really effective student-centered pedagogies that are also inclusive. And what I would like to see is, entire full curricula that have sort of truly embedded student-centered pedagogies throughout. And that's something that I was really intentional with as a founding chair of Wake Forest Engineering. So I hired the team, and in my exit interviews, I was very explicit in saying, theory and practice needs to come to life in every single class, right? And student-centered pedagogies are fundamental. And I partnered with the Keen network that many of you may be a part of, and that offered us an incredible resource of faculty development resources that simply were not available at our institution. And so I encourage all the faculty to take part and become experts in whatever pedagogy that seemed to click with whatever they were doing. I think in that line of thought of thinking beyond just one course, we need to think more holistically around the curricula. And so maybe Jenna and I have the benefit of starting brand new programs from scratch, but I was really intentional in the curricular structure that would allow students to not only access engineering, but to actually navigate through 4 years in a way that does not push them out. And so this is also based on work funded by NSF. So Greg Halliman, a Wake Forest alum, reached out in our first year, and I invited him to join us. And so he has done an incredible amount of work thinking about curricular analytics and the complexity of curricula, how we kind of put in place prerequisites, how we package together an entire curriculum. And so I think that's another layer of intentionality of thinking about an entire curriculum, not just what we do in any one given course. I'll just kind of stop with that and let others sort of add to it. Thank you.
Great. Alex?
I guess I'll start by saying that this is a topic that it's kind of challenging to talk about right now, particularly at the state where I'm in. Okay, so what I'm saying, it comes primarily from my experience, and it's not necessarily the representation of the university in general, but again, it comes from what I have seen as a faculty member at the University of San Diego and at UTSA, through my own experience. I think that thinking about the ABET, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social justice aspects is very important, particularly for me. I've worked at 2 different institutions. One was a emerging Hispanic serving institution. The other one is a Hispanic serving institution. And I think that those are important aspects that need to be considered, particularly for students that we have or that we're serving that come from non-traditional backgrounds, that come from low-income backgrounds, that a lot of them come from bilingual contexts. A lot of them also are non-traditional students. And so those challenges and those lived experiences need to be reflected in the curriculum. And so I think that more than the current status of it or the focus criteria, I think that we need to leverage that criteria to be able to serve those students and to actually engage them in engineering, to try to create curriculum that is more attuned to their lived realities, that is more attuned to what they experience, and that actually serves the needs of the students themselves. So that's the perspective that I'm coming from. I don't serve in an administrative role, right? And so it's more as a faculty member, and the things that I can do in my own classroom to help my students to think about these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice throughout the curriculum and not just as part of one class or one objective, but trying to integrate them in every single aspect of the curriculum. I can say that in the past, when I was at the University of San Diego, one of the things that we really encourage our students to do was to think about engineering not just as a technical, in terms of the technical aspects, but more of the social technical nature of engineering and how they could translate that information into their courses in thermodynamics, their courses in statics, their courses, all the way through the capstone design project, where one would expect students to really show all of that knowledge. And we wanted to make sure that the students showed that knowledge from the beginning, from the initial introduction to design courses all the way through the capstone design project. So I think that it is important to use what is at hand for us as instructors, to leverage that and to think about how it is helpful in terms of the context of where you are teaching.
Right.
Which I think just leaves us with me.
Yep.
So I would say, looking at this from a UK perspective, I guess a little bit like Alex was saying, these are my views. I don't necessarily represent everything that is going on in the UK. But there is a surprising amount of overlap. So the ABET equivalent for us is the Engineering Council. They look after accreditation of engineering degrees, and they have very similarly also started requiring EDI as part of the curriculum, which is fantastic to see. But I think also similarly from what has already been said, although it is a required part and it's a fantastic tool to leverage getting more of that into our curriculum, what I'm seeing of accredited courses, even with that requirement, is that it's still so much of a bolt-on in many cases, that it is only addressed in small areas, and that it isn't consistent throughout curricula. It isn't something that is therefore necessarily fully embraced by all of faculty. See some heads nodding, so you can see those parallels and overlaps. From our perspective, I guess we are doing some similar things around those sort of training at multiple points and teamwork in particular. We are trying to get those threads going through our capstone projects, but it's definitely a new area of work for a lot of faculty. So it'll be interesting seeing how it grows and develops over here as well.
Great, thank you, everyone, for your great responses to that first question. I'm gonna follow up with another question, and I think Alex kind of alluded to this, and so we might call on him first. But it's we're just going to ask you to describe the obstacles hindering the implementation of DEISJ concepts into your curriculum or courses, such as faculty and student resistance, legislative challenges, and other relevant barriers at the local and the state level. And Alex, we're going to start with you.
Yes, well, what could I say? There's obviously the legislative challenges, and I would say right now I'll explain how it's kind of working here in Texas. Our teaching is not impacted, right, by the law itself, but I know that maybe other institutions might have a different perspective on that. I think that one of the challenges is on how the laws are interpreted and how it can create fear amongst faculty to do something that might be really related to diversity, equity, inclusion, or social justice in their courses, for fear of dismissal, in a sense, right? And so you probably have heard on the news what is going on across, not just in Texas, but across the United States in different places, and how that has been impacting different programs. I would say that yes, it plays a role in hindering the implementation of the DEISJ concepts into the curriculum. But I think that from my own experience, I teach a course on the impacts of modern technologies on society, which does integrate aspects of critical consciousness and social justice into the course. Students want to do this kind of work, right? Like, yes, there are some students that there is some resistance from some students, particularly because they have a very narrow perception of what engineering is or what is not. A lot of the times we kind of feed into that narrative of what engineering is supposed to be or what it's not. And so I think that it is also kind of like a call to action to faculty to think about how we are talking about engineering, right? How do we define engineering in our own classrooms, through our curriculum, the ways in which we teach, the things that we emphasize in our classes. So I think that those are, you know, some of the challenges. There's definitely a lot of room for improvement. There's things that are a little bit out of our control, particularly when it comes to legislation, right? But overall, I would say that there's definitely those obstacles that come from legislation. Faculty, for the most part, again, they might feel some kind of fear because of this different legislation. And there's always this idea of I don't have time to do this. It's going to take away from these other important things that I have to do. It doesn't have value in the promotion and tenure process. My students are gonna set really bad things on my evaluations. And I think it's not knowing also how even to approach it sometimes, right? Like that a lot of the times faculty want to do everything at once, and you have to start just with very small increments in doing it, and finding ways to talk to people that know more about the different student outcomes from ABET and how to align them with your curriculum, how you can do it, getting that professional development. I think it's very important, and a lot of the times we just don't have access to that, or it's not prioritized in some institutional cultures. So I think that those are some of the challenges that I have seen in general, some of the obstacles.
Thank you, Alex. Olga, how about if we go to you next?
Yeah, what a great question, and thanks, Alex. I actually think the biggest obstacle is ourselves. And by that, I mean higher education. We're holding ourselves back. I really agree with what Alex said earlier about, and I call it student agency. We have a group of students incoming that are much more diverse than any of us. And yet, we don't stop to ask them what it is that they desire out of their education. And we don't help them kind of navigate the higher education ecosystem to figure out and give them the knowledge, the tools, the skills to actually be successful in the goals that they have. And I say this a lot for those of you that have heard me kind of speak. The Wake Forest engineering program would not be what it is and would not have achieved this outcomes that it has if we did not constantly ask our students what they wanted, what they hoped for, even from day one, the kinds of problems they wanted to work on, gave us insight to the kinds of projects that we would embed in the curriculum, the kind of paths within engineering they wanted to create, the kind of jobs. And so I kind of share that example simply to say that I think we're holding ourselves back. And I've seen a little too much administration that fears change, administration that's not willing to change the traditional ways of making decisions or protocol in ways that can actually benefit the students and the diversity of students. We simply don't have a faculty body that's diverse enough. And I see that even considering that the team that I built is 50% women. and 25% racial ethnic diversity, which is much better than many engineering programs, but still not good enough. We need to bring in the perspectives of a lot more stakeholders to the table. And so we need to be really intentional in bringing not only sort of the industry employer perspective and the practicing engineer perspective, but the perspectives of humanists, social scientists, right with us as we're developing curricula, as we're developing different sort of aspects of students navigating kind of higher education. So in summary, I think we are the biggest obstacle, and it starts with us to solve our own problems. Thank you.
Olga, thank you very much for that. So you're talking about using human-centered design to understanding your stakeholders. That's great. Chloe, we're going to go with you next.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would say the obstacles are slightly different here. Obviously, we don't have the same immediate legislative challenges. Although we do have a Conservative government who've been in power for a while now and are increasing their rights to be able to do things like send asylum seekers back and try to ban people from the coasts and stop the lifeboats going to get people who are trying to cross the channel. So, whilst we aren't in the same legislative, I can't even say it anymore, the same legal position, we have got our own challenges in terms of the fear of that legal situation appearing. Certainly EDI work feels more precarious than it did a few years ago. What we do have, I think, as a fairly large barrier in the UK is around that history. We've got slightly different histories going on there with regards to equity in the UK and the US. And we have so much kudos related to that history. So places, I come from Imperial College London. The name of our institution has got so many links to really significant issues in terms of colonizing and all of that kind of thing. But we're very hung up on the status that relates to that history. So it can be quite hard changing mindsets around that sort of thing. Even changing the name of a building gets very challenging. Apologies for my cat who wants to join in the conversation. So we have got different barriers, but I think actually the outcomes turn out to be the same. Actually, the impact of that is fear for faculty, it is fear of change, and it is some people therefore devaluing that work. So yeah, similar issues, but from slightly different reasons. Thank you very much.
And Jenna?
So I am at a private institution, which has been helpful because at least some of the things that happen maybe legislatively don't impact us, although that certainly could be changing. And there's been less at the state level, although that is also changing here. So we haven't been as impacted certainly as some institutions. I would say another thing that's really helped us in supporting it is that we are at a faith-based institution where diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice are very much viewed as a core part of our mission. It's not true at all institutions, but ours it is. And so you will see that upheld and listed as an aspirational goal and supported by everything from athletics to student success to our campus ministry and between. So it's just sort of part of our culture here at our institution. And so that's been beneficial as well. It's also been beneficial to us in embedding this, as Olga was saying, we try to embed this throughout what we do. So again, at Campbell, we are not selected admissions on purpose. Our goal is to weave in a very wide spectrum of student instead of weeding people out. And so again, that in and of itself means that we have on purpose a very diverse student body in just about any way you could think about it. And we value that diversity and support that. Our faculty is reasonably diverse. We have about 60% women, the fewest women we've had. We don't have as much racial and ethnic diversity as I would like. We have some, but again, it's something that we very much value and support. A couple of other things we do that help us sort of overcome or maybe avoid some of those barriers. As I mentioned, we focus heavily on sense of belonging and sense of community. Faculty, staff, and students from day one use a lot of evidence-based practices along those lines. And so again, that helps us create an environment where whoever people are, they get to bring with them and they get to be valued. And because we look at belonging for every person, I think what we do in diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice impacts. I think people tend to view it as impacting them personally, no matter who they are. And so they're not as likely to complain or something like that because they see the benefit to themselves. When I talk with our students about this, which I talk with all of our freshmen, I try to start off by painting it really broadly because we've all been on the receiving end of bias for one reason or another. And so if you can kind of connect students to those sorts of experiences, then they don't try to argue that it doesn't happen and it's not real and it's not damaging because they know it is. They can recall those instances themselves. And so again, helping them think about it through those lens, even if maybe they aren't impacted about X or Y or Z, really helps them embrace the sorts of principles and things that we're advocating for. And then one of the things that we do, because we do projects, small, medium, and large projects, all 4 years in every class, certainly not every project, but there are quite a few projects where students have choice. And the good thing about that is that students get to bring their experience to the table. So it's an asset-based approach instead of a deficit-based approach. So students walk in the door with all kinds of deep knowledge and all kinds of stuff that you would never even think about. And so when they get some choice on a project, they can focus on something where they bring a lot of knowledge to the table. So maybe they don't have as much pre-college preparation in area X or Y, but they have a lot of knowledge here. So they get to bring that to the table. It really helps them advance and do a lot with the projects that they're doing, far more than say I could ever do in that area. And again, it values the skills that they do bring with them. So those are some things that we do that sort of help us navigate around some of those barriers or sort of helped us avoid some of those and implement a culture that really tries to value and elevate these things.
Great. So far we've heard a lot of phrases like sense of belonging, student-centered pedagogies, and I think Jenna, you started to show some of this, but we're going to pose this to the entire group. And I think we should probably start with Olga. Olga, describe concrete examples and practical advice for incorporating diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice principles into the course content effectively. So when you say, you know, that student-centered pedagogy, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, great question. So I agree with Jenna in the aspect of choice. So even our very first engineering course at Wake Forest, we were really intentional. We created a module called What is Engineering? And through that, we help them figure out what it means for them. And so not only does that instill a sense of sort of purpose of better understanding how does one become a professional, and we actually bring also a historian who brings the perspective of engineering before engineers existed. This is a Renaissance historian. And so we take them through this journey of looking at history, kind of past and current, to understand the current state of the profession and help them sort of define their own path. And in the midst of that, they also do what's known as an independent development plan. So we have them start thinking about, what does this 4-year journey you're about to begin look like? What do you want it to be? Who are you as a person? What are the values that align with what it means to be an engineer? And so we kind of help and ask these big questions, not expecting that they will have complete answers, but as a start to initiating how they need to start thinking. And we continue to guide them in from that perspective and throughout the 4 years. What becomes visible, even when we're asking those questions, is their own sort of identity. They begin to define who they are and reflect deeply on that. And through that, begin to see that, yes, indeed, there's many differences. We invite them to interview engineers and learn that there's different journeys to, one, defining success, different journeys to embodying who we are as professionals, and try to create through teaming exercises, as Jenna can also pointed out, this recognition that bias is inherent in everything that we do. It's in us, it's around us, and so recognizing that is the first step in us becoming really good engineers. And it shows itself when we work on projects, when we think about the stakeholders we included or not, or didn't include in helping us make decisions that are sort of engineering decisions. And so, and that takes a constant commitment to faculty development to be able to kind of create an environment where we're not trying to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but to allow sort of self-exploration, and through that becomes an opportunity for community exploration and understanding one's role and purpose in society. So I think there's many ways to get there, and even beyond content. For us, it also revealed itself at Wake Forest Engineering by the fact that on advising, so advising that typically happens outside of the classroom, we encourage them to bring their whole self. We said, we know you're not just here to become an engineer. We know you have many interests. And so we were really proud to see that our graduating classes, 75% of them pursued a minor or a second major outside of engineering. So when we see anthropology, studio art, Chinese Asian studies, when we see that those kind of minors being explored too, we feel like we've done a better job at educating the whole engineer. So I'll stop with that.
That was beautiful. Alex, would you have your response ready to go? Thanks.
Sure, thank you. So I've taught different classes in the past where I try to integrate, different aspects of social justice into it. But I taught a course that was specific to engineering and social justice when I was at the University of San Diego, and now I have translated like some of that content to one of my courses in at the University of Texas at San Antonio. And the course itself is the main focus of it is to get the students to think very critically in their own ways of knowing, doing, and being, and how they translate that into putting it into practice for engineering. So one thing that my students do, we have a lot of different activities. The goal of some of those activities are to think about, for example, intersectionality, issues of intersectionality, and considering that for engineering design, issues of colonialism, globalization, decolonizing methods for engineering, right? Like thinking about designing just for the sake of designing something versus designing for the goal of social justice. And so the students, most of these students are actually working on their projects, and the goal of the project is of the course is to get the students to think about their projects in a critical way, right? So thinking about whether they have, for example, talked to potential users of whatever they're trying to design, if they have completed one type of immersion experience, and if they were even invited into communities where they're trying to build these things to support communities, right? Not being invited into those spaces, I think it is important to acknowledge the wealth of knowledge that comes from the community and how you're seeing the community, if you're trying to get to do something for that particular community. I also ask the students to think about the different structural conditions in which they're doing this work, right? What are going to be the benefits of this project for the community, or just in general for the user? If they have thought about, for example, issues like socioeconomic factors, laws, religion, right? Things that can impact also the implementation of their own projects. So trying to think about what are even the laws, the regulations, the social norms that are going to maintain inequality even after they leave that particular area, or the laws, regulations, social norms that are going to be needed for those designs to even get implemented in the first place. One of the other things that the students talk about is acknowledging their own political agency. So what does the landscape look like? How can they contribute to mobilizing power, or how can do some co-construction of knowledge together with whoever the users are. Also thinking about the fact that whatever they're designing is going to increase the opportunities for the people who are going to use these technologies, right? So does it really increase opportunities and resources for users? Who's going to benefit? Who's going to lose from that? What is going to be the value and the impact of that design in general? Making sure that they reduce any type of risk or harm to the community, right? And so, they go through that whole process. And at the end, when I was teaching this course at the University of San Diego, the students would take my class in the first semester of their capstone design project. And as they were analyzing their own project for capstone design, they were also doing this analysis of their own capstone design project, but with this particular lens of social justice. And the goal was to create a modification to the plan, right, to the project, so that they could implement it in the second semester to make sure that whatever they were proposing, or what they were thinking in terms of social justice, it could actually be implemented in the project, and then measure the impact of the project at the end. And I think that working in collaboration with the capstone design project coordinator was actually very good. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of the session that our students are usually our best advocates. It was because of the students that they were asking for this kind of course and this type of analysis that I ended up opening more sections to be able to offer the course to more students. And so, like I said, some of these concepts are concepts that now I'm applying for my course on the impacts of modern technologies on society. And I have a lot of resources, so if you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll be happy to share.
Thank you, Alex. Chloe, can we hear from you?
So we have a pathway throughout the degree, I would say, and we start off relatively small, and they start with us but running some sessions on things like unconscious bias and active bystander, so that the students are aware of those things within their interactions with each other, within communities. And we build on that year on year. So that starts them off. We're introducing some more things around allyship as well this year into their first year. As they get into second year, we have a professional skills module that includes things like teamwork and EDI within it. So it's very much, they don't do a great deal of teamwork in their first year, but in their second year, they have to do a lot more. So we focus on how are you going to do that? What are your inclusive methodologies for working in teams? Why does it matter that you are inclusive and equitable in your teamwork? And we hope then that by the end of second year, they've got a good grasp of how to behave professionally and inclusively as engineers. So when they get into their third year, we start having a lot more student choice. Throughout the first year and second year, there's a lot of the engineering science fundamentals, but we get into third year, and now we have students picking their own design, make and test modules, project topics, and then in their fourth year they're choosing their capstone projects as well. And in those, we try and make sure there are lots of inclusive options available. And I know Bree will not forgive me if I don't talk about one of my favorites, which is femtech areas. So I run a design project for the students that they can choose to do should they wish, which focuses on the testing of menstrual products. So there is no British standard for tampon testing or sanitary product testing. So we're creating the rig for it. So there's now a model of the vagina in my engineering office, which some of the male engineering students initially, what is going on here? But actually, the students who choose it aren't necessarily all the ones I would have expected, and it's really great to see that actually it isn't all females. And as well as that, I do projects around prostheses. I do projects that are around all sorts of different elements of EDI, and that spreading. It's not just me either. We had some amazing projects still in that sort of femtech zone. So we had students who were doing things like how to make biodegradable sanitary towels out of banana tree fibers, so they could be locally manufactured and biodegraded, so that people had access to safe and healthy products wherever they were in the world. So there's all sorts of things going on, and I think there's a real certain element of critical mass that once you're willing, Olga talked about the fact that we are our biggest barriers, and I think sometimes if you're the one who can have that bravery to put your head above the parapet and do something that on first reaction everyone goes, oh, periods, and runs away, or whatever it may be that they're scared of or feel uncomfortable around, but you're willing to do it, then you suddenly discover that there's someone else who's also willing to stand up and do something unusual and exciting and interesting. But you do need a certain amount of critical mass to get there. But yeah, I'm a big advocate, like many of the others have already said, about things like student choice, and making things relevant to the individuals who are doing those things, because it does give them a sense of belonging. I think many people, they fall into engineering because they were told they were good at maths and physics, so they should go and do that. They get into an engineering degree and discover everyone's talking about cars and doesn't really interest them. They start looking at careers in finance, or at least they do when they live in London. And then someone goes, well, actually, you could have a positive impact on things that you care about. Look, here's this period products thing. Here's this prosthetics. Here's this wheelchair. And suddenly you get students who are back re-engaged and excited about the positive impact they can have on the world.
Great. And Jenna, you started off with a few practices. Is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just to sort of tap into what everybody's been saying. So think about, what you're doing. How can you integrate this authentically? We've said several times, it can't just be an add-on. I think like, sticky notes or stickers that you put on the outside. It really needs to be embedded in a very authentic way in what you're doing. And it needs to be that way multiple places, right? If students just see this over here in course X, they don't really integrate it with everything. And then they need time to mature in their thinking and to grow and to learn, and so they need experiences. So we've talked about projects. Projects are a great way, particularly if you have a strong customer service model, because it builds some humility, because you don't necessarily understand the project nearly as well as the people you're trying to serve. All that sort of perspective is valuable for students. I've talked about the fact that we do a lot of professional development training. We also do a lot of service. Our students must engage in 50 hours of professional development service freshman year. And so again, that begins to, because they're serving a wide variety of groups, that begins to build more awareness. So again, talking about this very intentionally freshman year, weaving it in to projects that they do all 4 years, and then making sure that it's visible in lots of other ways really sort of helps seed that. And I will just add a comment that many times a lot of the most thoughtful reflections I get from students about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice come from students who would probably be the very last student you would expect to appreciate or understand or grasp. But again, when you paint it sort of in the term of belonging, because as Olga was saying, and I've said, we've all been impacted by bias and things. And so I've had some of the most heart-wrenching stories come from people that probably I would have thought would have been absolutely the dead last people to pick up on this, but they do, and they connect with it. And once they do, they realize how important it is. And so then they become passionate about educating themselves and making sure that they engage in that type of behavior.
Great. So first of all, I'm just overwhelmed by these amazing ideas and perspectives that are being provided by our panelists. So thank you very much. At this time, we're going to open it up to some questions. And I think the way that we'll do this is if you could raise your hand, and then I'll ask you to unmute. And so we're going to open the floor to questions.
You can find the hand raise in the reactions button.
Susan raised her hand.
Hi. I was wondering about pushback from students, especially in first year courses. And I realize the institutions that y'all are at have, it might not have that as often as some other institutions, just given the demographics or like the values for Campbell. I'm not super familiar with Wake Forest, but I'm just wondering about pushback from students.
So I'm happy to start. It's interesting. I think it's actually much easier, at least in our at Wake Forest, it was much easier to have these conversations up front when we were in a first sort of year engineering course to lay out the culture that we expected in the classroom. The moment they got entrenched in the more sort of bigger institutional culture that was not as diverse, it was harder to have those conversations when they became juniors and seniors. That was just, I think every place, I say that to simply point to the fact that I recognize that there's differences. And we may find that the timing is not trivial. But I also think to emphasize a point that has been shared already and to make it more explicit, the more authentically we can integrate these big questions or these big conversations to the engineering work they're already doing, I think it will reveal and begin to unpack for them what their responsibility as developing professionals and engineers is. So when the moment they're doing a design project, and so yeah, Jenna and I are talking a lot about projects because far too often we have engineering classes that have one correct solution. And the moment we introduce projects, we're introducing them to a different way of thinking because you know what? There's many correct solutions and many correct paths to get to a viable solution. And so when you're in that environment, I think asking questions like, hey, how do you turn needs of your user into design specifications? You can start asking questions of like, who did you ask? Who did you define as the user? Was that sort of an inclusive list? Who did you exclude? And you begin to sort of slowly navigating towards a different kind of thinking. And so I would just emphasize authenticity with the engineering work that they have to do already is important.
One thing which I'll mention that I haven't mentioned. So we have 8 values, and one of those values is community. Another one's professionalism. But again, those have been very intentionally woven through all 4 years. So our students are seeing this from multiple lenses. They see it in terms of projects. They see it in terms of our values, our emphasis on belonging, the institutional mission. And so they see this over and over again in lots and lots of ways. And so I think by providing them a lot of opportunities to think about or look at these issues from different lenses, I think you sort of begin to get around maybe some of those barriers or resistance that students have. You know, if you provide just sort of one little look at it, then sometimes maybe that doesn't resonate with the student. But again, the more you have people look at it and the different angles and the more personal you can make it, I think it helps get around some of that. And as Olga said, you know, when you continue to look at this all 4 years, it's not just sort of a one and done. Students always mature and grow up so much from the time they get there to the time they leave. And I think their own experiences help inform and support that as well.
I'm happy to chip in here as well. I would say we got quite a lot of pushback in those first couple of years of sort of engineering wasn't necessarily what they were expecting to ask them about caring about others and engaging with others. You know, they went into it thinking just maths and physics. And Imperial in particular is very well known for its engineering science focus. So it's very much about the maths behind things, the fundamentals. And we do probably less project work than quite a lot of other institutions because we're so focused on having very rigorous science and maths. That's not to say that anyone else's is less rigorous. It's just, it's very much the focus of our program. And that's why the students have come to Imperial, and literally the name as well. You know, partly the reputation, but it's what they're expecting when they get to us is not to have to think about those things. So there is pushback. My first EDI lecture that I give to them, very much I focus on what is the value of it, and I will give them the data on you know, and the evidence on the fact that there are financial benefits to being diverse and inclusive, that your company is likely to be more profitable, likely to be more successful if you have those things on your managing board, for example. And I very much share that, and it does quieten down most of the trolls. But certainly I get really positive feedback from a lot of the marginalized communities from the very fact that we have given a talk about unconscious bias or active bystander or EDI. So even when there is pushback, I don't care, because it's empowering those that need to be told that they do belong here, that you know this is why you matter, and it's also empowering their allies, because we've got quite a lot of really good-hearted, largely you know middle-class white guys who want to do the right thing but don't know how, and when they are in a team with a marginalized person and a troll, they don't know what to do about it. So actually I think a lot of those things, actually if I'm getting pushback, then it's because I'm doing the right thing. It's because I'm making them uncomfortable and they know they're going to have to change their ways. So yeah, take it as a reason to keep doing it rather than a reason to stop.
Alex, go ahead.
I was just going to say that just from my experience, I think that it does take a collective effort, because you know, you can teach one class that is amazing with engineering and social justice, and if you get discredited by the rest of your faculty colleagues, I think that can have an impact on the type of narrative that it's created around that course, around your department, and around the students that even are interested in those topics, right? And so a lot of the times you know, as Chloe mentioned, I think it is because of the unknown and not necessarily knowing how to deal with the unknown that comes from other faculty. One thing that we have tried to do is to ensure that we communicate this, like the impact of this, not just to our students, but also to our faculty, so that the narrative starts to change within the department. I think that coming together and thinking about what are the values that we want to instill in our students, I think that is also very important, because we might have different words to describe the same things. And I think that coming to that agreement is important. Just looking at what the mission of your department, or what the values of your department are, the learning objectives for your students, what you want your students to get at the end of their program. I think that is very very important. And I agree, sometimes a lot of this challenges come from just students not necessarily knowing what engineering is also. I think that that also has like the type of discourse that we're creating out to the public. I mean, just think about like the Big Bang Theory, for example, right? How they present the engineers and the scientists and all of that. I think that all of that adds to this idea of what an engineering is, how they're supposed to behave, what they're supposed to do. And I think that it starts with us and trying to challenge those discourses, those dominant discourses.
I can add, what Chloe and Alex, their responses reminded me that one of the first things we do in the first week of class is invite students to define the kind of culture we want to create in the classroom. And this links to all these bigger questions that we're all trying to get them to. So we asked them, envision an ideal workplace environment. What does that look like? How's your supervisor treating you? How are you interacting with your colleagues? And just those questions, which shouldn't feel like an attack to anyone, right? Because you're asking them to define the environment that they will feel safe to work in, to learn in. And then we say, well, let's create that environment. And you use their words, right? And their words will be ones of trust, ones of respect, ones of clear expectations, communication. And so Chloe's and Alex's responses just reminded me that that is one thing that will help them define this culture that we want to create. And then we keep reminding them what they said. So we did this with our first inaugural class. They gave us responses, and when we saw things begin to sort of deviate in the classroom, where we started to see maybe some indicators of assumptions being made, not listening to each other, we brought up the responses and kept reminding them of the kind of culture we wanted to create, and it was their answers.
Now, I might add just one thing that, I think everybody has sort of touched on is that, if it's part of your culture, I mean, as students come and visit your institution. So if they can see your culture, then some of it is probably also self-selecting, right? If a student sees your culture, if that's not what they're interested in, they're probably not going to come. So, some of it is also how much does your culture reflect this? How much is it embedded as part of your values? And if it's there and it's visible, then, you probably have, at least to some degree, some students picking the institution because that's something that they value, at least to some degree.
Do we have any more questions right now? If not, we'll move on to the next question, and we'll have some time for more open dialogue here in just a couple minutes. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move on to the next panel question, and you guys did in your in some of your responses somewhat address this, but if you could talk about like some specific strategies that you might offer as advice for people moving forward that want to do this, for advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice into their campus culture, and also acknowledging other institutions or individuals who have excelled in this area. So if you could provide some examples of specific strategies from your own experience, or specific strategies that you have observed and you're like, wow, I'd love to do that at our institution. And for this one, let's start with Chloe.
Thank you very much. So in the UK, we have the Royal Academy of Engineering, and they very generously provide funding for a few different things. So two things I'm going to mention are funded by them. And one is that we have their visiting professor scheme, which really encourages us to engage with individuals from industry who have expertise that we don't have within our institutions. And it's a really great opportunity for us to reach out, because so often we don't have DEI expertise within a department necessarily. So there's a couple of examples of that across the UK at the moment, where people have got visiting professorships relating to things like inclusive engineering. And it's great because so often there are better, faster things happening in industry than there are within academia, because inherently academia it can be a big, slow beast to get moving. So actually those visiting professorships can really influential for that. They often also mean that coming and being a professor suddenly becomes accessible to someone who it wouldn't otherwise be. So visiting professorships for us, funded by the Royal Academy, are usually something like 12 days a year. So it's not a full-time job, a full-time commitment. You as a educational institute have to offer a lot of support to that individual, but you're getting their expertise. So I know I'm working with a woman with MS who is wheelchair bound. She's partially sighted, but it means that she can come and be a professor in a university and hasn't got all of the marking and all of the tenure problems. She's just able to come and share her lived experience and share her expertise. She is an engineer as well, and it's a great source for us to get expertise. The Royal Academy for Engineering also has a specific diversity fund, and some really great projects have gone on through that. So I would thoroughly, I'll stick a link in the chat later, recommend you to look up some of those, because they've got some really inspirational ideas. But the one we've been lucky enough to get funded at Imperial was having a pre-welcome week event for our low socioeconomic students to all come to campus for a week before university started, to come and get acquainted with university life, because they're all students who haven't had a parent go to university. They're all students who perhaps would have felt overwhelmed, and we have such small numbers of them at Imperial. It is quite a financially elite institution, so it's such a really great opportunity for those students to make connections and feel like they're a sense of community, rather than feeling like they're the only one in the room who feels this way, who can't say yes to go out for lunch or whatever else. And it's a great thing for us. And of course, I would have to say some of my own work as well, running the UK's first EDI in engineering module. That started off with actually coming from a student idea. We funded an undergraduate research project. 3 students sat through their summers and came up with these ideas. We tweaked it into something that was more practically and pedagogically sound, but it's very much rooted in their ideas. And it gives us so much time and opportunity for co-creation and student voice, because it's brilliant to listen to students, but how often do they have the time to devote to talking to you? And actually, by putting it into this this module within the curriculum, yes, they're learning all sorts of things about EDI. We're full of guest speakers, full of different topics that we teach them about, but then they go away and design their own initiatives, and we give them a relatively narrow scope of how much time or money that initiative could be for, and then they're coming away with things that we can actually implement within our curriculum. So it's such a great way of getting student voice from people who have been educated about EDI, and it's hugely powerful for us. So anyone wants to say more about that, please do ask in the Q&A or drop me a line.
Great. Jenna, let's go with you next.
All right. Well, I am a big fan of adapting and implementing, and with a lot of the DEI work that I've done, we've used sort of that approach. So there are a lot of best practices out there, things that we know that work well, evidence-based practices. So, spending some time reflecting, thinking about, your own institution, your own program. We've talked a lot about authentically integrating this. So thinking about where you can do that, because there's a lot of different places that you can do that, a lot of different ways that you can do that, and what works at one institution might or might not work at another for a lot of reasons. But look at some good practices that are out there, find an institution maybe that is similar to you, and try to see what kinds of things are they doing, and then look at trying to sort of adapt and implement that for your own use. I know that any of us on the panel would be happy to chat. If we're doing things that would be of interest, we'd be happy to share those, and people in general are happy to do that sort of thing. So an effective way is to begin to think about it. And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. If this is not something you're doing very much of, then you don't want to bite off more than you could chew, so to speak. So think about something you can do that well. And then I'm a kind of a fan of layering, so it's hard to change everything overnight, but you can do one thing and then next year you can do something else. So within a few years, you've done a lot. You've built up a lot of changes, but you've been able to do so in a way that's manageable and palatable and lets you integrate things and kick them off well and tweak them to make sure that they're sort of on good footing and that they last and are successful.
Great, thank you so much. Olga?
Yeah, I agree with all the strategies that have been mentioned. What a lot of people may not know about sort of my journey is that I worked with psychologists and doing both research and implementation for about 10 years. And I continue to do so. I mean, I hired the social scientist for 3 years that helped us kind of build Wake Forest engineering. And so I would simply say, reach out to a social scientist. Learn, like, we need to model for our students what they should be doing. And in the same way that we're saying we need to help them be comfortable, we need to sort of be a little bit uncomfortable, reaching out to experts within our own ecosystems. I bet you everybody has a sociologist or psychologist at their institution, and they would love to have a conversation with you. Help them sort of ask big questions. They will approach it from their perspective, but you will learn immensely from that. And if you invited them to your classroom, I'm sure they would be happy to come. And so I think we need to reach out and model that for our students, bring experts outside of our area, and hopefully they invite us back. That doesn't always happen, but hopefully they begin to see the value of engineers in society, and we begin to get invited also. And so I think that's a simple step that anybody can do even today.
Great, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate your responses. So we're going to open it again. We have about 10 minutes left, so we're going to open it up again to some more questions. You can either put your questions in the chat or you can raise your hand, and we will be calling on you. And you can share ideas too. These don't only have to be questions. If you have great ideas, we would love to hear some of your ideas as well.
I want to pinpoint something that Megan is saying in the chat, Pollock, about these different sessions where we can come together, because it could be also a very lonely road working on this kind of stuff in the field. And I think it's always nice, and it's part of why we even have this panel today, to show that, we're not all alone, but developing this community across the country, across the world, where we all know that, we can always reach out to someone, and say, hey, how's this happening at your campus? And this is what's happening at mine. We want to make it so that there's this fluid community out here where you all know that, you could always reach out.
I guess the other thing I'd like to say, if it's okay, if you're digging for questions, is I think it needs what we're talking about needs to be part of everything that we do. Like every decision that we make, whatever position that we're in, whatever decision we're making, we should be asking ourselves, have I included the people that need to be around the table to help me make that decision? Like, it's just like that simple. Have I included the voices, right? And when you do that, and when we do that, I think diversity outcomes are inevitable. I don't think any of us set out, like, we may have a vision of we want a really diverse engineering workforce, but it doesn't happen overnight. I think it starts with inclusion. It starts with equitable processes, changing the processes upon which we've traditionally sort of operated in, changing the structures. And I think diversity is inevitable when we do that. Every single decision, we don't even need to call it DEI, just do it. Just think every decision we make.
Donna had a question.
Hi, Jenna. This is Donna Reese, and I am. I want to ask a question related to sort of. We started this talking about ABET new requirements for DEI within engineering, but broadly across all of ABET's disciplines. Y'all have given some great examples. That language is currently out for public comment. And as you can imagine, we have gotten some very positive comments, but also we get comments from people who say this does not belong in the ABET criteria. And I wanted to get y'all to react to that. I have a feeling I know how you will react to that, but I'd like to ask that.
Go ahead, Jenna.
Well, so just how you think that we should respond to those comments, Donna? Is that really what you're wanting us to?
Yeah. I mean, how would you respond to people who say that this shouldn't be part of the ABET criteria?
So again, I would probably go back and think about, okay, what is it that we're training students to do in engineering? We're training them to solve problems. They tend to do that as part of a team, and they tend to do that for a very wide spectrum of customers. And so to do a good job of that, everybody on the team needs to be able to contribute and do so authentically. They're there for a reason. So if we have a culture on a team where people are not valued, or they're not listened to, or their expertise doesn't come to the table, then the design's not likely to be effective. And if we do a design where there's problems or issues, people's lives can be at stake, right? And so as engineers, we are morally and ethically obligated to make sure that when we have a team, that everybody listens, that they're respected. So we come up with a design that we're not making mistakes because we haven't, been willing to listen to other people. I mean, it's core to what ABET is asking us to do. It's core to the engineering profession. So I don't see how you could possibly oppose that. They may say so, but we know that diverse teams come up with better solutions to challenging problems. The problems we have are only getting more challenging. I mean, there's semi-truckloads full of research that show that. So, we can't act in opposition to what we know to be true.
Who else would like to respond to that question? That's a great question, Donna. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond, and I agree with Jenna. I think when I see those responses, what comes to mind is that, okay, we're not going to change that person, right? We're not, and we can't change everyone. Whether those criteria sort of move forward or not, I think it's really important that we continue to do the work for the reasons that Jenna said. It's our ethical obligation, it's our ethical responsibility, right? And I think I actually will put it in a different way and say, if we don't, our profession will not survive. It's also right, if our profession will continue to be marginalized, and I know engineering has a different status in various cultures, but we will not survive what's coming our way if we continue to dismiss the importance of this essential work. And so it's survival. Like, will that move people? Like, I think we just need to do the work that needs to get done, independent of whether criteria exist for it or not. And maybe that's the wrong way to look at it, but.
No, that brings up a thought from me of, so how do we make sure that change lasts beyond your presence. So if you decide to, change your role, how do we move from this idea of solving one individual issue to changing policies and structures that may last beyond our time at an institution?
I'll just say that's one of the reasons it's important to get it in the criteria, because that outlasts all of us, I hope.
I'm also curious, I kind of have a follow-up question. I've done a lot of work on promotion and tenure policies, and I'm curious about, at your institutions, is diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice, is that integrated into your promotion and tenure documents as part of your criteria?
I will say it's reflected in our institutional mission, and institutional mission, everybody must outline how it is that they support our institutional mission. So in that way, it appears it's not literally the diversity, equity, inclusion words, but the mission and what it encompasses certainly embodies that. So.
Anybody
Same
else?
for us. Same for us. It's not an explicit thing, but it's embedded in our values. It's embedded in the culture we create. It's embedded in sort of what we value, the criteria that we've established to truly include, right, the student voice, to truly include real diverse perspectives in a lot of the work that we do. And I think that is the hard thing. Changing policy to move us in the right direction is a hard thing, and it's one of the reasons why I kind of moved back to thinking about being at NSF and thinking about what did I learn from building a second time a brand new engineering program from scratch where we achieved that amazing outcomes, but I know are not sustainable in an institutional culture that does not sort of have the operation to continue to sustain it. So yeah.
At Imperial, I would say that, similarly, it's not explicitly part of promotion criteria. So promotion criteria are education, research, leadership and management, and profession and practice. So you could absolutely use EDI work within that. So you could talk about how you had made teaching more inclusive to help you meet the teaching requirements and teaching evidence. But you could absolutely be doing all of those things without thinking about EDI and still meet promotion criteria. So yeah, it's not truly embedded.
And Bree, I think we're close to being at time, right? I saw you raising your hand.
Oh, sorry, I was
I'll
stretching.
turn it over to you.
I was stretching. But since we only have 1 minute, I'm gonna go ahead and close. And Megan, I'm gonna wrap in your upcoming series since we're close on time. But Megan Pollock is our chair for the Commission on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and she has developed this community discussion series titled Engineering Solidarity, a community conversation series on navigating anti-DEI this series on April 23rd, May 1st, and May 9th. And the registration link is in the chat if you want to access it. But thanks again for joining us for this critical conversation that we needed to have. Because I guess one thing that I loved about this conversation was that hopefully you all feel like you all have tangible examples of something that you can do at your institution. And hopefully you feel comfortable to reach out to some of our panelists to ask for resources that they may have used to develop their courses or to overcome various challenges in their departments and institutions at large. So once again, thank you so much for your time and staying with us until 3:30 Eastern Time. And lastly, I want to thank our panelists. Y'all were awesome. Y'all were everything that we expected you to be when we first started having this conversation and thought about who would we want to be our panel, be on our panel? And so once again, thank you so much. I know I speak for myself, Margie, and Peter, that we appreciate your time, and we hope everybody has a fabulous weekend. And within the next few weeks, if you want to share this recording with your colleagues, feel free. It will be on our YouTube channel and our webpage. So once again, thank you. And lastly, you'll see us at the conference as well. We have an excellent program for you that includes another awesome panel. We have a distinguished speaker, and we have our DEI 100, DEI 200, as well as other guest community conversations, panels, and workshops. And so I'm so excited for ASEE 2024. So if you're in Portland, make sure you check out our program. Thank you.